Hey, Natan, how you doing?
How's it going?
Doing well, doing well. We're talking about recruiting today.
Love it. What we do every day, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's a journey. It's a learning every day, never fails. So let's dive into, some interesting roles that require folks to set up recruiting processes from end to end, starting with a chief of staff role. I see it time and time again where, these are usually one of those early stage hires. They're coming in at the Series A, typically after a significant financing, company founders expanding the executive team, the broader org, and they don't have any processes in place. And so this role is coming in and this person's coming in and trying to implement something from zero. Have you seen that process? Any comments around how well it goes or how poorly it might go and how you plug in to those
Yeah.
processes?
Yeah. I mean, we see it all the time. We work with a lot of early stage companies. We've been doing this for more than 11 years, working with hundreds of tier one VCs, thousands of companies, making thousands of hires. As you know, well, early stage companies don't always have someone leading the recruiting charge. Usually it's a founder. Oftentimes, again, well, the chief of staff, they get this thrown on their plate and it's a little bit of what do you do here? So a few recommendations and we can go one by one, but I'd love your thoughts as well. You know that side better than I do. But one of the processes that we take companies through, and I think is usually the first step, is really defining the role. Like, is this role necessary? If it's necessary, why? What are the problems that they're solving now, for the next few days, for the next few months, for the next few years, right? And then what are the skill sets and the background and the culture that you're trying for in this role and obviously culture in other roles as well. So I think that starts with, whoever's running the process, let's say it's the chief of staff, sitting down with the hiring manager and really nailing those things down. Once you have that information, I think we can put together a job description, which is used to send and give to candidates. From there, I think defining a really strong interview process. It's funny because lately I've seen a lot of companies struggle with the process, especially if you don't know, right? You're a chief of staff, you might not know, how to hire an engineer, right? So you're putting together a job description. I think it always starts with understanding the candidate's interest, right? And of course, qualifications. And I think there's a few ways to do that, but I'm curious for you, how often are you seeing a chief of staff jump into this? What are the first few steps you think they're looking at? Any challenges you've seen?
Yeah, I see it on chief of staff job descriptions all the time where, this person is going to be in the lead for quite literally setting up the recruiting function and maybe even outright, hiring specific roles on the team. And so, as you mentioned, they might be coming in and needing to set up a process for an engineering hire. They are the ones who can usually run with projects end to end, so they can go from 0 to 1. But they also, the strong chiefs of staff know what they don't know. They're aware of their limits. They're aware that there are others on the team, leaders on the technical side who inevitably will be involved in the hiring process and sharing their best practices as well. And so a great chief of staff will gather insights from all the big stakeholders and make sure that there's buy-in. Like, let's say we have a final draft of a job description. This is exactly the person we're looking for. And I think flipping it to when you're hiring a chief of staff, through experience, what I found is that a lot of times things shift through the process. A client will get excited about a specific candidate archetype that we might present. And they'll say, oh, actually, that skill set has become more important now that we're seeing it, we're hearing them in an interview. And so calibrating with clients becomes really important as part of the process. I think that might be a step that early stage teams might miss, or they're just not thinking about the nitty gritty of a process. And that's exactly where the recruiter lives and where they excel. And I think where they provide a lot of value. So for example, you asked about where teams might miss on process. And I think it's setting up weekly syncs to chat about new candidates that are currently in the process, getting feedback after interviews, because all of that information is really valuable to everyone who has a seat at the table, not just for us as recruiters, but to play back what we can to candidates. And assuming that a client is excited about a candidate, we're excited to share that enthusiasm with them and keep the candidate engaged, get them even more excited, teach them something new about, where this role could be headed, or like what career pathing could look like for a chief of staff, for example. That's something that always gets candidates excited. So, the real nitty-gritty details of a process is where recruiters come in as a, good support system.
Yeah. I'll add to that. And I think it's a little tip or trick, in my opinion, is on that conversation in the weekly sync, also have the job description up front and center. When you're looking at feedback, when you're listening to feedback, is there an area that we need to really double down in the job description and say, this is a requirement, this is a must-have, it's not a nice-to-have. Or actually, it's not a must-have, it's a nice-to-have. Or it shouldn't be on the list at all. I don't know why that's there. It might be something small, right? People are going to apply, you're going to get candidates, especially if you have ads up, and you might get them in the hundreds or even the thousands. But I think continuing to iterate on that job description is going to help you align better in your hiring and really buckle down. I think also adding in terms of the nitty gritty of the process, the actual interview process and where we're losing candidates, right? And I know we're starting the process and we'll see how things go, but some things that I tell my recruiters are, what are we looking at in terms of time to hire? In terms of time to hire, I'm not exactly talking about, from the point we start the search to the point we fill. I'm talking about how long a specific candidate is in the process. And for us, if that's longer than 3 to 4 weeks, there's a big drop off in that offer being accepted, right? So I would look at 1, maybe 2 rounds per week and 3, 4 rounds in total, hopefully, that we're aligning to. And then we can dive deeper into like what those rounds look like, but giving yourself that structure of saying, okay, are we fitting in this timeline? Are we fitting in the amount of interviews? Because what happens oftentimes is going with the flow, as you know well, that wishy-washy leads to a wishy-washy result, right? And you're just going to hurt yourself more and more. And that's why I think recruiters are so important, because they're often the ones that are following up, making sure we're finding the process helpful, being efficient, et cetera.
Exactly. And I tell clients this all the time. Strong candidates have options. We've seen it time and time again. And so a tight process is really key to keeping candidates engaged. And I also share that inevitably through the process, at some point, the client gets really excited around one candidate or maybe two candidates, right? So we call them 2 finalists. And the scales tip now towards not the candidate selling the client on how good they're going to be in the role and the value that they can bring, but it's the client selling the candidate. And the question that starts coming to the forefront in their mind is, how am I going to close this person? Help me close them. And so that's where recruiters play a huge role that I think is maybe overlooked by folks who, poo-poo recruiters. But we're that interpreter for the candidate. So now when we're debriefing with the candidate after every touch point with the client, after every interview, and we learn, how are you feeling? What outstanding questions do you have? What's going to move the needle for this opportunity over others that you might have in the pipeline? Like, we learn so much from the candidate, and then we play that back to the client because we want them to go in with their best foot forward at the next interview, anticipate questions from the candidate, double down and emphasize the things that are the candidate's, ears are going to perk up to and get excited about. And everyone's excitement kind of continues in the same direction, right? Up and to the right. It's kind of like dating. Every subsequent date, the excitement builds and builds and builds until hopefully, you become exclusive, except with this process, you're dating the candidate and then you're getting married.
Right. I think it's also interesting to think about the balance between excitement and security, especially for the early stage companies. Like, how do you do that correctly? Because sometimes those are not correlated, right? Excitement and security, especially when we're talking about early stage, right? The excitement of building something new and working on something or with some people you've never worked before, having funding, being at the early stages. I think there's a lot of excitement, but as you look for more senior people, those people are in real life, they're married or, they're with a partner, or they have outside commitments or they have children. And it's hard to keep them, making them feel like they're going to be able to have that balance in their life, which is often people want hard work. They want, hours being put in, not just the, 9 to 5. And so I'm curious what you think, and I'll give you my opinion after on how do you balance excitement and security in that offer process, in the interview process?
Yeah, it's asking a lot of open-ended questions. It's not just focusing on pitching this role and this opportunity and pushing onto the candidate. It's drawing information out of them. It's learning more about what drives them, what they're looking for in their next role, almost independently of what you're trying to pitch them on. And then your job as a recruiter is to draw the parallels between what they say they're looking for and what this opportunity offers. It's kind of like, if I'm at the beach, I don't need sand. I got plenty around, right? But if you're lacking, a margarita, well, maybe I can sell you a margarita. And so we can talk about that. And I think underpinning all of this is caring, simply caring that you're presenting a good opportunity for someone and not just trying to make a sale or, get a placement and win a fee. I always talk about the win-win-win, and everybody should have like this full body yes feeling going into a process. And I think maybe junior recruiters or people who are starting out and doing this the first time as an agency recruiter, they really just want to like make the placement. And so they'll push, and you kind of like forget about this is a person on the other end of this, and you want it to be a full body yes. And it's okay to be explicit about the good and the bad about the role, and actually spend more time on what the negatives could be, because you want to present a really strong filter out, right? You're filtering out candidates in that initial screen, that first time you're getting on the phone with them to try to determine fit. Because what you don't want to have happen is you're only pitching the good things. You're not touching, the dogs in the cellar and the negatives, or, hey, this, it's first time founder, or their co-founder left the company and, they just did a layoff. There's so many things, like you don't want that even coming up as like research that the candidate did and say, well, why didn't you tell me about this right halfway through the process or towards the end? And now you risk derailing the whole thing when it could have been avoided and could have saved a lot of people a lot of time, including your own. So those are the things that I think I would talk about. It's like, a candidate's going to get excited when they have the full picture, when they feel like you care about their needs, because you do. And yeah,
I'll add to that. I think that's great. The negatives and giving a full picture, right, of what the role is. I think doing the little things right, something that I've learned in my 11 years or 11,000 years of recruiting, I think is so important. So some things that we do that I think would be easy for a chief of staff is creating a one-pager about the company. And you don't need to share it with every candidate. We don't, but the candidates that we get a mutual yes to at least have the first conversation, we give them a one-pager on the company, a snapshot of here's when it's founded, here are the investors, here are wins, here are the things we're working on, as much non-confidential information as we can give. So that the conversation, it shouldn't just be a one-way conversation of me selling or asking. It should also be a conversation of you selling and you asking, right, as a candidate. And that little aspect of understanding the curiosity of the candidate is helpful.
Yes.
Right. So you need to be able to have them have access to data about your company that's easily accessible. And they might be doing a million things. That's okay. But if you send them information, they should read it, right? And they should have some good questions. And it should be more than I'm just looking
Yeah.
for a new job where I find AI interesting, right? And I think that's a good way to measure in terms of, should we move this person forward, right? If they don't really show any curiosity and you're an early stage company, that's a bad sign.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know that candidates sometimes take a really broad approach to like send a generic resume over, send a generic cover letter over, and maybe that works. Maybe they get interviews, but it's like once you're in that interview process, you need to be a savage. Like you need to research your interviewers, the founders, the history of the company, their website, any articles, any YouTube videos, stalk their Twitter accounts, find out what they're interested in, what they're posting about, if information like that exists. Literally become a walking encyclopedia on the company. And through that process, good questions will come your way. Asking good questions is what's going to show the curiosity. There's a difference between bad questions and good questions. I would say a bad question is, what keeps you up at night? Right? It's like, everyone kind of asks that question. Sounds clever, but when you hear it like 20 times in an interview process, because 20 candidates ask it, it's not that unique. But something like, what's non-obvious about your company that people on the outside looking in don't see, but is critical to your success? Or what does product market fit look like, and what are the metrics you're currently using to measure that? I recently read that in a Substack. I have to drop the reference here, but those are examples of good questions. And of course, you can tailor them to the company. You can even share your own perspective of, here's what I think product market fit could look like for you. How are you currently, measuring it internally? And I think that shows that you've done your research. And time and again, particularly for the chief of staff role, if you don't do this, it will be a non-starter for next steps. Like, it will be a disqualifying factor. Showing curiosity is huge.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, especially working with, you're a chief of staff working probably with the founder, CEO. I think that makes a ton of difference. I'll add a few things into the process. Obviously, chief of staff, usually someone very business minded, but really outlining everything probably on one document. We use like a Google Sheet just to keep things easy. And I would put a few things in there. In there, I'm having the pipeline, not just who, the candidates are, but reasons that they were rejected or reasons that they were moved forward, they were able to move forward, and, analyzing that data, continually updating the job description with that information. I would include the interview process, as that's usually flexible and moves. And sometimes, different candidates have different processes. So when we have those weekly syncs, we're aligning on what's going on, the messaging to candidates, not just over email or text, but also on the phone. Are we aligned in what we're telling the candidate, so that when they speak to 3 people, they're not getting 3 different messages of what's most important at the company, right? And and other free tools. But I go back to like doing the little things right. And I know that sometimes recruiting is like, okay, let's just run in, let's get candidates, let's put them through the process. And I would take a step back and make sure that, role, process, pitch, communication is down, and we're all on the same page.
Yeah. I think you bring up a really interesting point about the internal team that's part of like the interviewers being aligned on messaging and how they're answering the same question amongst them. So, candidate asks the same question about culture, let's say, to the COO and the CEO and someone in HR. You want that answer to be exactly the same. Everyone's going to have their own perspective, certainly their own flavor, but the core message of, let's say, core values at the company, where the company's headed in the next, 18 to 24 months, that reflects that everyone, first of all, knows what the vision is, know where we're headed. We might be in a couple different boats and we have different priorities in each of those boats, but we're all rowing in the same direction. And I think if candidates hear disparate responses from each of those people, and it doesn't sound cohesive, or it doesn't make sense, or the answers don't mirror each other to a great extent, then they'll get spooked. They'll actually get really turned off. They'll get really worried and wonder what's really going on here. No one knows what's going on, right? If they can't align on, what the big objectives are and what the vision is. So having clarity before you embark on a long hiring process is critical to it actually being a successful process and hiring somebody in the end, and ideally within a decent time frame. I mean, you mentioned, a couple weeks long process for any given candidate. I think that's a really good frame because, candidates will come into a process, they'll exit a process at different stages, but you wouldn't want any single candidate in like 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks, or longer. I think also a question that recruiters get is, what's your time to fill? But, a lot of the times the actual interview process length impacts that. So it's a confounding kind of metric to use, I think, to measure recruiter performance, at least like an agency recruiter performance. I think what's interesting to hone in on is, the turnaround time to present that first group of candidates, how quickly you kick off the search, what the sync cadence looks like, how responsive you are to their needs, if things change, at any point in the process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense. It makes me think, as you're saying that, of like the little things where if you look at an experienced recruiter, which obviously a chief of staff might not be, they have a lot less tolerance for BS, right?
Sure.
And you might not know that because the chief of staff might not know that because they haven't seen it, but a lot of this is the alignment early on, right? Of course, you're going to move and you're going to iterate and you're going to hopefully get better as time goes on. But those time allotments of like, this is how long it should take. This is how many candidates we think we can deliver in this period of time. We need to get feedback within 24 hours. The reason we need to get feedback is because this is going to help us iterate on our sourcing, right? So that we can get you better candidates over time. These are the types of companies that we want to go after. This is our top list. This is our second list. This is our third list. Get me someone from these companies, right? And then a good recruiter is going to look at these companies and say, hey, do we really need someone from this company? Or can it be, instead of fintech, can it be health tech, right? Because they're both government regulation. And continually looking at these lists of data of, again, where is the candidate coming from? What is the messaging? Do we need this sort of skill set? Is that okay? I'll add as well, in terms of transparency to the candidate, the little things of like, what are the hours that the candidate is expected to work, right?
Yes.
And missing that up front causes a lot of damage later on. Is there an amount of, outbound that you're expecting from the candidate in certain things? Is there an amount of meetings? Is there an amount of in-person conversations that you're expecting? Travel? People, I think it kind of scares them. Or like, oh, we can be flexible for the right person. Go for the top of the top and then be flexible. Show, exact what you want, in my opinion, and then be flexible, as opposed to making it more flexible and then, narrowing it down.
Yeah, sometimes it comes down to get that answer out of a founder. Sometimes it comes down to just asking the question, what do you really want? What's your ideal? What's your ice cream sundae with the cherries and sprinkles on top in this candidate? And then they're like, actually, yeah, I really want them to be excited about being in office 5 days a week. We're also regularly putting in 60 to 80 hours a week. That's the norm. Sometimes we even work weekends. And what's uncovered through the questioning there and really getting down to brass tacks is that they're sometimes scared to tell the candidate that didn't appear anywhere on the job description, right? The candidate has no idea why, what the culture is all about. And hopefully they'll find out about it through the interview process. If the company is transparent, sometimes they're not transparent. And that's where, in certain cases, I've stepped in and advised them that here's how we're going to run the process. We're going to take this information about the 60 to 80-hour work week, and that you want them to be really excited about 5 days on site, and copy, paste that into our pitch, and just be super explicit. And then ask the candidate directly, what do you think about that? How do you feel about that? Is that what you're looking for in your next role? And then really listen, not just to what they say, but how they say it. If we hear hesitation in their voice, we're on it. We're gonna dig there and be like, really? Are you sure that's what you're looking for? You're currently working in a hybrid role. Do you really want to go back to? It's almost like you're trying to talk the candidate out of it to some extent because you want to push them. Like you just want to give them that opportunity to really open up. Sometimes candidates will not open up fully unless you dig. And so I think just it behooves everyone to be explicit about aspects of culture that might not align for candidates. To founders, to hiring teams, I'd say don't be afraid to put this information out on your job descriptions because you're doing yourself a favor. You're actually reducing the applicant pool in the direction that you want to reduce it in, which is you're only filtering in people who are on board with that versus, maybe you won't get 1,000 applicants, maybe you'll get 500 really interested people who are on board with that culture. And if you're misaligned on culture in an early stage, I mean, you know how that ends up. So
yeah,
you don't want that.
I think, as people that have seen candidates unfortunately not work out, reverse engineering what you can do it's kind of like the post-mortem before you have the death, right? Like, why did this person die before they died? Let's try to prevent that,
yes.
And so I think some things that I heard you saying were there, I would just add a few, like, what do you expect the deliverables to be? Here's a good one. What confusion or ambiguity do you expect? Because I don't think it's ever perfect, especially in an early stage company or a startup, right? So what confusion or ambiguity do you expect? It's also a good question to ask candidates of, how they've dealt with that in their past. So they're coming from a big company and they have months to build something or solve something. That might be a problem when you have hours or days. Right. And
yes.
And it's up to them to figure it out. Right. So how do you test the candidate in terms of their learning abilities and their ability to build quick? I think, moreover on that is also communication, which is how often do you see yourself actually talking to the candidate in their work? Right. And I know this can change, but is this like a once a week, we're going to have a meeting? Is this every hour we're going to be talking on Slack? Like those are things that early on are important. And especially if you're grabbing someone from a bigger company, they don't know what it's like to work at a small company. It might be totally fine, right?
Yeah.
But it might also not be fine. They might think it's okay to go to the grocery store at 12 o'clock on a Thursday. And it's not okay to you, just to give that example. So more upfront, I also would just add in terms of the leadership ability of the company. And I know the chief of staff sometimes doesn't control that, but really digging into vision in the recruiting process. When we talk about communication being aligned, it's like, here's where we see the company going. And we're going to keep hitting that point. Like we want to solve 1 billion, we want to help 1 billion people help their elderly parents. And this is how we're going to do it, and getting that message like really refined, I think is going to help understand why why this hard work is important, why these hours are important. Sorry for rambling there, just a little passionate.
That's perfect. I love it. I wanted to pull on the thread of big company versus small company experience. This is a really seemingly hot button issue when it comes to hiring for the chief of staff role in particular. Big trend I'm seeing is every founder wants somebody who has, let's say, management consulting or venture PE experience, plus hands-on operational experience at an early stage startup or at a startup that's scaled, A to C, B to D, or what have you, or basically experience that's relevant to what's going to be required of them in the role. More often than not, that tends to be early stage experience. And so every time I've posted about this on LinkedIn, gets a ton of engagement because people have really strong opinions, mostly on the candidate side, where they argue that, somebody who has big company experience can hack it at early stage. And, what I've tried to share and interpret, be that interpreter for the founders that we've worked with on these searches is that, sure, like that might be the case, but there is like a limited number of bets that a founder can make on a candidate. They are going to look to de-risk their downside in making this hire. How do we de-risk downside? we look for somebody who has already the experience that we need this person to have in this role. And for them, things that they've done before that, they've kind of seen this playbook and it's not their first rodeo. And so that doesn't mean, management consulting experience plus I went to Amazon for a couple of years and now I'm ready to move to an early stage startup. Maybe there are great people in Amazon, right? Not to discount them, certainly not. But they're going to look for people with certain experience because they want to make a more like a surer bet on that candidate. And someone who has early stage ops experience means that they've worked in an environment where it's little to no budget. There's no team to delegate to. Like the buck stops with you, essentially. There is little other infrastructure outside of the core team. And you really just have to figure it out. And there's no red tape. There's no, I need permission or this. So just go, right? Just do. More often than not, there's those decisions. It's like two-way doors versus a one-way door. It's like, if it's a two-way door, yeah, go ahead and make the decision. You can always walk back through the door if it's a mistake. If it's a one-way door and, it's permanent or mission critical, think twice. But that's kind of what they're looking for in terms of talent for the chief of staff role. And I tend to agree. It's not for lack of trying on the recruiter side either, because I've certainly, presented candidates that have had intrapreneurial experience where, they're part of this bigger organization, but they've carved out this niche, or there's this new business unit that they're trying to build and get off the ground, or new product that they're building and getting off the ground, but it's, dead in the water most of the time.
Yeah. I think, I'll add that all these tips and tricks are great. But I think recruiting comes down to two main things, which is network, which you're great at, right? And then the ability to engage and convert. And at SingleSprout, we've been doing this for 11 years. We have a niche, which is startups, hiring engineers, product managers, data scientists, designers. And that's all we do. And we've been engaging, and we know how to find the right person. We know how to engage the right person. We have 5 software engineers that we're investing 7 figures every year to help us really analyze that data and make sure that for the candidates, we're putting the right opportunities in front of them. It all starts there, for us, making sure the candidates feel like we're not just spamming them with any job opportunity. It actually matches their experience. From there, that's when we start getting the yes. And once we have the yes, we can get them into the process of, whatever company is a fit. And so that's a little bit more about us, but I think I'd love to hear more about your network and how you are able to engage and convert.
Yeah, absolutely. Similar to what SingleSprout is doing, niching down, I think is so critical. That was, my number one goal is to go an inch wide and a mile deep on all things chief of staff. And that's what we've done over the past year and a half now since I founded Right Hand Talent. And, we have 11,000 candidates in our database who have, expressed interest in the chief of staff role, either applying directly on our job board, for recs at our clients, or just submitting a general interest form. We have the largest chief of staff newsletter. We have right around 9,000 subscribers. Wow. Started from 0 last year, and thanks. Yeah, so we're really proud of that. And so we have we've built a deep network of current chiefs of staff, aspiring chiefs of staff. We can dive into, do full text resume searches on all the resumes that we have in our database, and really get granular through Boolean search on mix of skill sets, which is so unique for the chief of staff role, search to search, like company to company. It's not, if you've met one chief of staff, you've met one chief of staff. And so I think there's a real benefit to having a large and varied database and sort of niching down in this way. And a lot of our candidates, we've placed great people. We just wrapped our first COO placement last week. And we're really pumped about that. So leaning more towards sort of these leadership role placements on the operations side of the house. chief of staff placements tend to be in this director to VP, SVP level. We've placed a couple C-level folks, a couple ex-founders, which is always exciting when founders want to hire ex-founders onto their team. I think, Rippling does that, and they've benefited immensely from that strategy. So we've seen a lot, done a lot, and yeah, we're excited to continue to place amazing chiefs of staff at early stage, tech startups, and expand into other leadership roles as well.
You're my number one referral partner for chief of staff.
Oh, you're the best, Natan.
No, I think you're fantastic in what you do. I'm really excited for 2025 and beyond. I know we're coming right up on that, and excited to see all the chief of staffs that you place and then become, an executive, and then wind up hiring more chief of staffs from you. I think that's always amazing to see for us. I think that's one of the coolest things, is seeing that career growth in our candidates. And when we place a candidate and then, months later or years later, they come back and say, we need to hire from you as well. It's like the next generation is here. And so I admire what you do. Thank you so much for having me on, and hopefully we got some good knowledge across to the audience.
Thanks, Natan. Yeah, it's been awesome. And, you're my first call when I started Right Hand Talent. So truly learning from the best here. And it's awesome to see your work and the amazing people you've placed. So excited to continue building our relationship and friendship. And yeah, it's been a blast today. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Zahra.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
See ya.